And now, I would like to invite to the stage Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Academic Programs, Caroline Casagrande, to introduce our next distinguished speaker and a very special guest. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you to Assistant Secretary Royce for that incredibly energetic call to order. I was particularly excited to hear Rutgers' great response as an alumni, so well done, RU. I am Caroline Casagrande, and I am the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Academic Programs at the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. And I am so honored to be with you today because my first job in government was actually in Africa when I was a student at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Pretty awesome, right? And so it's really my great honor to be with all of you today. The United States Congress appropriates funds for us at the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs to support the Mandela Washington Fellowships. My office has the privilege of overseeing this fellowship along with our friends at the Bureau of African Affairs. But now it is my pleasure to introduce to you a truly inspirational American leader who will formally welcome you on behalf of the United States government. He has dedicated his entire life to service, and now he continues that service as a member of President Trump's cabinet. On March 2nd, 2017, Ben Carson was sworn in as it's pretty awesome, as the 17th Secretary for Housing and Urban Development. For nearly 30 years, Secretary Carson served as Director of Pediatric Neurosurgery at the Johns Hopkins University Children's Center. He assumed this position when he was just 33 years old, making him the youngest major division director in the hospital's history. In 1997, he performed the first separation of twins conjoined at the back of the head. Yeah, it's pretty. In 1997, he also performed the first successful separation of type 2 vertical craniopagus twins in South Africa. Dr. Carson has received so many awards and medals, we cannot name them all. But a few important ones are the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and in 2008, he was named one of America's best leaders by U.S. News Media Group and Harvard Center for Public Leadership. He has authored 9 books, including 4 which he co-wrote with his wife, Candy. Dr. Carson graduated from Yale University and earned his MD from the University of Michigan Medical School. He even has a hospital named after him in Nigeria, the Benjamin S. Carson School of Medicine and Babcock University Teaching Hospital, which opened in 2012. I have to tell you, I have seen him speak once. I was sitting next to my mother, and by the end, she was crying. So I look forward to a great speech because it was so inspirational. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Ben Carson to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Caroline, for that wonderful introduction. And officially from the United States government, I want to welcome you all to Washington, D.C. You know, interestingly enough, a few years back, I had my DNA testing done and discovered that I was 77% from sub-Saharan Africa. And we were able specifically to trace back to a migratory tribe called the Turkana people in Tanzania and Kenya. But it's so important that the different nations of our world come together, transcend our differences, and face the future with a common bond. And while every country has its own unique history, at the end of the day, we're all one family. We all came from the same place. We all have the same creator. And this summit does a tremendous job of celebrating that fact. And the brilliant minds represented here are going to be the leaders, not only on the American stage and the African stage, but on the world stage in the future. And each one of you is not just a cultural ambassador of your nation, but you're going to be the ones who have unique knowledge and wisdom to spread to the rest of the world. But I encourage everybody here to become lifelong students, because education is the real key to success. You get a good education and you make yourself incredibly valuable. And the more valuable you are, the more money you make. But more importantly, the more people you get to influence. You know, it's interesting. This country is made up of multiple demographics and people from virtually every part of the world. But do you know the demographic that has the highest family per capita income in America? Nigerians. And if you know any Nigerians, you know that a bachelor's degree is the baseline. And then they go on from there. Tremendous amount of emphasis on education. And it shows you that that even trumps anything else, including your national origin. And, you know, we all have struggles that we face in life. But I think those struggles are the things that make us who we are, that give us the perspective that we have on things. And, you know, I remember as a pediatric neurosurgeon spending hours, sometimes operating all night long on young children, trying to give them a second chance at life. Most of the times being very successful, only to find myself a few days later in a major dilemma. Because now many of those youngsters I had to send back home in East Baltimore in horrible conditions, rats and roaches and mold and lead and crime. And I didn't want to send them home. Sometimes I would order extra tests just to keep them in the hospital on that extra day. Don't tell anybody. But, you know, now as the head of HUD, Housing and Urban Development, I actually have a chance to do something about it. And you know, that's the way God works. He gives you these experiences. He gives you the obstacles. He gives you the things in life so that you will now have the perspective to do what needs to be done in life. So my department now is in charge of making sure that all Americans have access to quality, affordable house, to their American dream, their striving for prosperity. But, you know, if you'd known me as a youngster and someone said, see that guy right there? He's going to become a renowned brain surgeon and a cabinet member, you would have laughed yourself into oblivion. Because, you know, I was not a good student. Everybody thought I was stupid. My classmates thought I was stupid. You know, I thought I was stupid. And my teachers thought I was stupid. You know, the only one who didn't think I was stupid was my mother. You know, she was always saying, Benjamin, you're much too smart to be bringing home grades like this. I brought them home anyway. But, you know, she always believed in me. But I remember once we were on the schoolyard, we're having an argument about who was the dumbest kid in the school. And it wasn't a big argument because they all agreed it was me. But then someone tried to extend the argument to who was the dumbest person in the world. And I said, wait a minute. I said, there are billions of people in the world. And they said, yep, and you're the dumbest one. And to compound the problem, when we got back after recess, we had a math quiz. Now, I was not a big fan of math. And you had to pass your paper to the person behind you. They would correct it. And then the teacher would call your name, and you had to report your score out loud. No problem if you got 100 or a 95 or even a 90. Big problem if, like me, you got a 0 and it just had an argument about who was the dumbest person in the world. Because I knew they were all going to laugh hysterically and say, we told you. So I started scheming. I said, I know what I'll do. When the teacher calls my name, I'll mumble. And the teacher will think I said one thing, and the girl behind me will think I said something else. So when she called my name, I said, 9. And she said, 9? Benjamin, you got 9 right? This is wonderful. I knew you could do it if you could just put your mind to it. Class, Benjamin got 9 right. This is wonderful. It had 30 questions, but she was just so happy. And the girl behind me finally couldn't take it any longer. And she stood up and she said, he said none. And the kids were just rolling in the aisles. And if I could have just disappeared into thin air, never to be heard from again in the history of the world, I would gladly have done so. But I couldn't. So I had to sit there and act like it didn't bother me. But it did. It bothered me a lot. Not enough to make me study, but it bothered me a lot. But you know who it bothered even more than me? It bothered my mother. You know, she came from a huge rural family, got married at age 13, trying to escape desperate poverty and hopelessness. Years later, discovered that her husband was a bigamist, had another family. Had to try to raise us on her own. But, you know, she had only a 3rd grade education. She was illiterate. And she worked so hard, 2-3 jobs at a time as a domestic. Or at least that was the guise. She told everybody she was domestic. She was cleaning people's houses, but she was really a spy. Because she was spying on those people. She wanted to know why they were doing so well. And she concluded that it was because they did a lot of reading. They didn't watch a lot of TV. So she came home one day and she imposed that on me and my brother. We were not happy campers, as you might imagine. In fact, if it had been today's world, we probably would have called social services and they would have taken her away in handcuffs. But, you know, she said, you guys turn off the TV. You can watch 2 or 3 TV programs per week. And with all that spare time, you're going to read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Library and submit to her written Vic reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. And then she would put little check marks and underlines and highlights, and we thought she was reading them, but she wasn't. But you know what happened in reading those books? I began to read about scientists, explorers, entrepreneurs, surgeons, all kinds of people. And even though we were desperately poor, between the covers of those books, I could be anybody I wanted to be. I could be anywhere in the world. I could do anything I wanted to do. And I began to understand, as I read about all those people, that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you is you. It's not somebody else. It's not the circumstances. You know, we live in a world today where a whole bunch of people are trying to convince everybody that they're victims and that somebody else is in charge of their life, that some circumstance is in charge of their life. You know what's in charge of your life? You are. And the brain that God gave you. The human brain is the most fascinating organ system in the universe. Your brain remembers everything you've ever seen, everything you've ever heard. It can process more than 2 million bits of information in 1 second. Give you an example of how complex your brain is. How many of you remember what you had for breakfast this morning? Let me just see your hand. Okay, see how quickly you remember that? Now, what did your brain have to do for you to respond to that question? Well, first of all, the sound waves had to leave my lips, travel through the air, enter your external auditory meatus, travel down to your tympanic membrane, set up a vibratory force, which travel across the ossicles of the middle ear to the oval and round window, send up a vibratory force which mechanically distorted the microcilia, converting mechanical energy to electrical energy, was traveled across the cochlear to the cochlear nucleus at the pontomedullary junction, from there to the superior auditory duct, sending bilateral. But, you know, the fact of the matter is I could go on for quite some time talking about what your brain had to do in a split second, and you barely had to think about it. What could your brain do if you actually put your mind to doing something? And that's what we all need to be thinking about. How do we use those incredible gifts that God has given us to benefit other people? It makes all the difference in the world. And, you know, I have an opportunity now as the Secretary of HUD to actually use that brain and to use those experiences to try to make the pathway a little faster, a little safer, a little easier for many other people. And that's why this administration, for instance, is pushing things like opportunity zones. As a result of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, every governor of all 50 states and 5 territories, as well as DC, given the ability to designate 25% of their economically deprived areas as opportunity zones into which people could invest unrealized capital gains for the long term. And if they left them in there for 5 years, they get a 10% decrement on the amount of capital gains tax they had to pay on their original investment. They leave it in for 7 years, 15%. You leave it in for 10 years, you don't have to pay any capital gains on the new money that was realized. Now, that's obviously a tremendous economic incentive. And some people have complained and they said, but that's only a mechanism for rich people to get richer. It's not helping the people in the area. Guess what? Newsflash. Rich people are going to get richer anyway. So if you can create a program that encourages them to take their money and invest it into areas that have been economically deprived, you now provide an opportunity for people who have been forgotten about to get something. And it's already been shown that the land values in opportunity zones, and that land is owned by a lot of those poor people, is increasing in value at double the rate as land outside of the opportunity zone. So they're already benefiting. But what we have to start thinking about, particularly in times where we have the lowest unemployment, particularly among minorities, ever recorded in this country. Manufacturing jobs are coming back. Training opportunities are available for people. We're finding ways to readjust the criminal justice system so that it's fair. You know, this is a time when we should be coming together to think about how can we make this even better? How can we solve some of those problems? We have to think and with great compassion about all of those children who are exposed to lead and mold and vermin and violence. And we have to be thinking, how can we solve those issues? Because we, the people of the world, have a brain. And if we begin to use that in an effective way, can you imagine what we can get accomplished? For thousands of years, men have fought each other. Doesn't matter whether it's good times or bad times, they just don't seem to be able to get along. They have to demonize each other. They have to destroy each other. Is that really our lot? Must we accept that as human beings? Isn't it time to stop fighting each other and start working together? You know, everybody in this room has a sphere of influence. People who will be listening to you now and in the future. We have the ability to get people to start thinking in a positive direction about godly principles, of loving your fellow man, about caring about your neighbor, about developing your God-given talents to the utmost so that you become valuable to the people around you, of having values and principles that govern your life. And if we do those things, then there really is an opportunity, not only in each of our respective countries, but in the world, to finally have peace and prosperity. It's a choice. We have to make that choice. And as our world family continues to get bigger, we must do our part to make things better. This summit gives me great faith that we are doing just that. Enjoy the rest of your time. Thank you, and God bless you.